Welcome to Park Media. My name is Vince Emanuele, and today we are speaking with Jessica Garraway. She's an activist, organizer, and teacher who is in Minneapolis, Minnesota right now. She's going to give us a little word about what's happening on the ground. Jessica, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. All right, so give us a little background for those who might not know. I guess you'd have to be living under a rock to not know, but if you could tell us a little bit about what's happened in Minneapolis, and then we'll dive a little deeper into the topic. So give us a little background about what's happening, what you've been seeing on the ground.
So, the resistance we are seeing here on the ground was sparked by the circulation of a video showing George Floyd being killed, the full recording of his murder, with a police officer putting their knee to his neck and cutting off his air supply. People saw that, were enraged. We've, in the Twin Cities, we have had a number of tragedies with Jamar Clark being killed by the police, Philando Castile being killed by the police, and the only time a police officer has gone to prison for killing a civilian, I can't remember the names involved, but it was in the case of a Black Somali officer that killed a white woman, which is, of course, a tragedy. But it is a tragedy, but it's obviously racialized, who gets justice and who doesn't. So the people know that. The people are angry, and with all of these tragedies, we've had marches, peaceful marches, over and over again, and people have finally gotten to the point where they're fed up, and the idea of we can keep doing the same thing and get justice is just absurd, and the people know it. On the ground, we've been seeing people. You see, there's been a lot of injuries. They're shooting projectiles at people. They've used up all of their tear gas, which I was tear gassed a few times. That's my first time. And they were just releasing all of it onto the public. You saw there has been a lot of like break-ins with different stores around the area, the big corporate chains. Noticed that minority-owned businesses, especially if they have a sign that says minority-owned, people tend to respect that and leave that alone. There are some places that have opened up space in their building to have a medic station, and the community sees that and respects that. So there are a couple medic stations, so people can be taken care of. I haven't been down. I'm planning to, after this interview, to head down and see what's been going on today. But the resistance has spread all throughout East Lake Street into Uptown. This is happening in Minneapolis, and I've heard of spread into St. Paul. I've also heard that my side of town, North Minneapolis, people are gathering, and there's been break-ins into corporate businesses as well.
Speak to this issue of so-called violence. You see all of this out there now. I see it a lot less. I'm sort of interested to know whether you see the same thing. So, being involved with social movements for the last 15 or so odd years, I had never seen in my life the sort of positive response and reaction that I've seen to the protests and rebellion in Minneapolis. In other words, 6 years ago in Ferguson, Missouri, we were still having arguments with people about, this is unjust, and you're still hearing that, but to a much lesser degree. I see the amount of support I have seen for these actions, and totally brushing aside this sort of like mainstream media narrative of, why destroy your own community? Why conduct these acts of violence? Can you speak to that issue? I think it's so important right now.
It is. It's profoundly important. And I want to say the first day started with a march that had about 20,000 people.
Wow.
And it started from the place where he was murdered. George Floyd was murdered to the precinct. And there were pacifying elements there, but unlike let's say with the Jamar Clark killing and the uprising that happened over that, they weren't able to gain control of the crowd and the people. Like those, they were shouted down. People weren't listening to it. People weren't having it. And I want to speak to the question you just posed. Um, First of all, we need to not think of property destruction, especially corporate property destruction, as violence. And I mean, because people view the damaging of inanimate objects the same way as they do the hurting human beings and living beings. I was part of the Standing Rock struggle as well, and there were comrades that I'd worked with, unbeknownst to me, sabotage some of the pipeline valves. We made a point even then too to say, hey, this is in defense of life, not in an effort to take away life. So one, I don't think destruction of property is violence. And two, this might be more controversial. I think we need to question the idea of what is and isn't legitimate violence. Because the state, in a lot of people's minds, and what we've been taught, has the monopoly on violence. And we need to not see it's like a buzzword that we hear that just paralyzes people from thinking critically. Yep. There's when we're talking about systems of injustice, oppression, and exploitation, we need to see resistance to that the same way we would see a resistance to someone protecting themselves from somebody who's trying to hurt or assault them on the street. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't say to them that, well, you're acting violently. No, you're using violence as a defense of your life. Mm-hmm. And we need to justify that. And I was in the streets, and people were very, when it came to all of us together, like it was a very, there's a lot of solidarity amongst people. Like there's an emphasis on making sure that we're all taken care of, making sure that, people aren't getting hurt as much as possible. Like we don't do things that inadvertently put other people in danger. There were some situations where people had like firecrackers and then they went off like in our crowd, and they're like, no, wrong direction. Like those things happen, and no one thankfully was hurt, but people were quick to redirect that. Mm-hmm. I want to address this idea of like, oh, well, there's the good protesters, quotations, right, and the looters. Well, and this idea that, oh, it's outside agitators doing this. I'm like, sorry, but no, like this is coming from people from the community, one. And two, in a time of a global pandemic and a slumped economy, mm-hmm, people taking things that they need.
Right.
And like, I'm going to say it, I don't give really a damn about Target and like the fact that a couple of large screen TVs have gone missing. Like they're going to be okay. They're not going hungry.
That's right.
Like, again, we really think about, because, it's the way that we understand the concept of property and property rights has warped our understanding of what really matters. Like, again, in this country and other places, capitalism, violating property rights is akin to harming individuals. In fact, that's valued more than harm to human beings. I do see there is pushback to that. Like there is, I will say that there are pacifying elements that are trying, Al Sharpton came to town today. And
I was just going to ask you about those pacifying elements, because I remember them vividly, not just from Ferguson, but from Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin. I remember them from anti-war protests under the Bush administration. These pacifying elements come out under these circumstances always. You can count on it like you can count on the sun going down at night. So they're there now. So when did they show up? Who's there? And what exactly are they trying to get people to do?
So there were people the very first day that were attempting to pacify the militancy we saw. I mean, just to be clear, I mean, we've seen, if you look at the pictures, you've seen different places, like the AutoZone is on fire. Like a lot of places have been set ablaze. One especially, I think it's important to know, a gentrifying high rise.
Oh, I had to ask about that. Because as soon as I saw that on the live stream, I'm up at 2:30 last night. I'm walking around on my roof having a cigarette, watching these things happening, and I could not believe it. Number one, the scale. And number two, when I saw that building, I said, you know what this looks like? This looks like all of the motherfuckers who are trying to build condos in our area as well. I mean, our city is ravaged, deindustrialized city. We've got a maximum security prison, a casino, a coal-fired power plant. We can go on and on how destroyed the city has been. And yet they're still trying to put up luxury condominiums. So that is indeed what that was.
Yes.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Like, okay. But where was I with that? Yeah, so the city is ablaze. And again, like I said, I feel like people have been trying to make an effort to respect like minority owned and small businesses, in a uprising, which is what this is. I think there's this idea people have that it's going to be clean,
right?
And it's not going to be clean. I mean, there was a man that I've heard I was shot at by a business owner, and like that's that's horrible and that's horrific, but this uprising had to happen.
Yeah.
Like there's no way around it. It needed to happen. And unfortunately, when we resist, like these things happen. Like I think there's also this idea that when we resist, we can do it in a safe way. Right. And I like to say that we need to act in ways that keep us safer. But because when we're resisting the state, when we're resisting corporate power, it's never going to be 100% safe, especially if we're doing it right and we're actually effective. I think sometimes so much of what we do is not strategically effective that we don't get a harsh blowback, but we don't realize it's because we're not being effective.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a really good point. Can you speak, you mentioned it earlier, can you speak a little bit to the solidarity? I mean, I saw what I was also amazed to see from these live stream videos, just anecdotally, was the wide variety of people, excuse me, both ethnicity and race, but also, also age, gender. I mean, talk to us about the composition of this rebellion. I mean, who's in the streets? Who are you seeing? Is it as diverse? Is it as like this multitude of people that I've been seeing, from the organizers that we follow also from that region? It's been quite amazing.
Yeah, I would say this is definitely a multiracial struggle. You see young Black folks in the street people from the community. You see a lot of white folks out there who are, poor working class backgrounds, and also people who have radical politics that are there in solidarity with the struggle and are a part of the struggle. I've seen a lot of Latino folks, Native folks, like definitely a multiracial struggle. And it's something that's really beautiful to see how people who aren't just Black are upset and outraged. And it's so clear, this injustice and the racism that, it's so abundantly clear. And it's been beautiful to see that other people besides us are angry about it and want to throw down.
I totally agree with you. And who are are there organizations driving this rebellion? Or would you say that there's organizations there? Or is this in some ways very spontaneous? How much of this is I'm interested about those dynamics.
Oh, well, so being there, I've been involved. So I've been involved in other police other organized responses to police killings in this town, as well as other places. And I would say this movement when I was in the streets, was very leaderless. Mm-hmm. A lot of people acting within their own affinity groups, taking actions with their own people. There were attempts by people, I think, in the very beginning who were part of more respectable organizations to quell the outrage that people had, but that dissolved pretty quickly. There aren't when I was in the areas where we saw the most militant resistance, there were not any organizations running the show. And I would say more established orgs that have more that don't have militant politics, these are the people who are bringing in Al Sharpton
Right.
and others to like pacify and to co-opt the struggle. Like there's this idea that we need to control what's happening or quell what's happening. And I'm like, if we had organizations that were doing, building strong relationships with the community and had gained that trust and had made concrete differences in people's lives, then maybe the people would want to listen to those voices. But that hasn't happened. I don't think that the time when the community decide to rise up, I don't think that's the time for groups to try and like absorb all that energy and have them listen to them. Like if you were relevant if you were relevant before this, maybe, but you weren't. So, what makes you think that you have legitimacy to do that?
That's a great point. Are there any particular organizations, affinity groups, any sort of groups that you would want to sort of put people in the direction of those groups, like groups that you would particularly like to praise?
There's let's see. Like I said, I'm saying, like, I'm one person, so there's a lot that I may not be picking up on, but I do know North Star Medic Collective here in the Twin Cities is doing good work, taking care of people, making sure people are safe, making sure people have water when there's pepper sprayed, and handling some of these other injuries. So I would do a quick Google search of them. They have a blog, North Star Medic Collective, and contribute their way. Also, I haven't, let's see, something that's interesting happened, I think, that could be really important is some of the work that other groups have been doing in terms of getting reduction in basically, like, other groups have been working on decreasing the police budget. Mm-hmm. And understanding, like, okay, this growing military police state is what's driving these deaths and the oppression in our communities. We need to cut off funding. We need to cut off that funding for that. I know Black Visions Collective has been doing that work. And I do think this is one example that I think is good of using this energy that has blown up in this city, that's come about in this city, to direct it towards some concrete goals that we can achieve. Now, I'm for that. I'm not against channeling energy, right, but I am against stifling energy and co-opting energy, No,
that's a great point. One last thing I want to ask you, or I would like you to speak to this, and I'll sort of ask, how you think folks can plug in, what you think the best thing is for people to do. I saw a post that you made earlier. I totally agreed with it. There's people out there saying, where can I send my money? And I'm like, look, great if you do that. We need solidarity actions. We can get into that, but I wanted to get you to speak to this. There's this sense, especially in the liberal press, in the corporate media, that, now it's a crisis. Can you speak to the fact that this is an ongoing and sort of daily crisis, and the only reason it's a crisis right now is because of this rebellion, because the crisis is now inconvenienced business as usual, that there is an ongoing crisis that communities of color face, that poor people face, that the planet faces right now, that this isn't like a new thing, I think, for a lot of people in the community, and I think for others it is.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've heard this chant as someone who attends protests: no justice, no peace. Mm-hmm. For the longest time, I was kind of annoyed when I'd hear it being chanted, because we would give there was total peace.
Right.
To disruption. There was no rebellion. And I wonder, do people even know what those words mean? I mean, I think people are afraid of really embracing what that means. And what I've seen on the streets here in Minneapolis, is that people have finally started embracing that. And because like you said, this isn't just a crisis now, it's been an ongoing crisis. It's not just the police killings, it's the police brutality, it's the occupying force that they represent in this neighborhood, in our neighborhoods. I mean, I go to the Walmart, or excuse me, I go to the McDonald's, there's a police officer there.
Right.
Like, I go to Cub, there's a police officer right by the grocery store. I grew up in Iowa, Sioux City, Iowa, and police aren't good there either. But this is when I moved to a bigger city, just seeing how in urban areas how they occupy, like this, and it's normalized, right? But people still feel that boot on their neck. And this is, and not to mention, the rising cost of living and gentrification. I mean, frankly, I see the burning of that high rise as representative of us resisting those efforts to push us out of our communities.
Yep.
So and I firmly believe that any kinds of reforms we may get out of this is going to be because of the militant resistance that happened. I mean, people forget Black Lives Matter started in large part due to, or was kicked off by, the resistance in Ferguson that happened, which was not pacifist by any means. Let's see. I wanted to say one more thing. Darn. Yeah, so it is messy and it's scary at times, but this is what needs to happen. Oh, I remember what I wanted to say. There's the fact that these officers were fired right away. That I don't think that would have happened without militant resistance. This is the first time in our state's history that officers have been fired, right away for a killing. Also, there's a university here, U of M. They announced that they are no longer going to be using police officers. Yeah,
that's great.
That's great, and I don't think. Do I think that would have happened without a militant response? I really don't. People don't understand. Like, these uprisings are, they are the shot in the arm that our movements need. And far too often people try to stamp out the very forces that are, giving life to the struggle, to the movement.
And you folks are giving life and struggle to a movement well beyond Minneapolis. Let me tell you, the only reason people are finally, I think, shaking the cobwebs of the COVID and all the rest is because of what they saw and what they've seen in Minneapolis. The only reason we're now having protests. Now, before this, there were protests in our neck of the woods around prison transmissions. We have two hotbeds right in our city of Michigan City and a neighboring city of Westville. They're the worst prison cases of anywhere in the state of Indiana. There's been caravan protests. Some of the families of people who are locked behind bars are the ones who set up those protests. But largely, as you mentioned, the established organizations, the existing progressive left organizations, they really have been nowhere to be found over the last 2.5 months. Some people are doing workplace organizing, but I just want you to know, not that it makes much of a difference because you'd be doing what you're doing regardless, but what you folks are doing is having an impact far beyond Minneapolis. I mean, there's now protests popping up all over Northwest Indiana, and it's because of what they're seeing in Minneapolis.
That is so good to hear, because we don't want these uprisings to be, flashes in the pan, right?
Yep.
We want it to catch on like wildfire.
Yeah.
And to hear that that's happening, and I'm excited for the kind of movements that will be birthed from what we're seeing in Minneapolis.
Right on. Well, that's a good spot to end. I know you did this last second. I appreciate you doing it last second. Thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. I'll look forward to listening.
Right on. We'll have it up by tonight.
Awesome.
All right. Take care, Jessica. We have been speaking with Jessica Garraway. My name is Vince Emanuele, and this is Park Media. Hey, thank you for watching and listening. If you think this program is worth a pack of cigarettes or a cheeseburger, you could become a Patreon for as little as $3 a month. The link is available at our website, parkmedia.org. That's PARCmedia.org. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel below. Also, you could find us on Instagram at Park Media, Facebook at Politics, Art, Roots, Culture, and you could find me on Twitter at Vince Emanuele.